Welcome to The Chill Scientist. Let's jump right in. The story of human food begins with a simple biological requirement. Life requires energy. Every living organism on Earth must capture energy from its environment and convert it into forms the body can use to maintain order, grow, and reproduce. In humans, this process takes place through metabolism, a complex network of chemical reactions that transform the molecules in food into usable cellular energy. At the center of this system is a molecule called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, which acts as the universal energy currency of life. When humans eat, the carbohydrates, fats, and proteins in food are broken down during digestion into smaller molecules such as glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids. These molecules are absorbed into the bloodstream and transported to cells throughout the body. Inside each cell, mitochondria, often described as the power plants of the cell, convert these molecules into ATP through processes such as glycolysis, the citric acid cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation. Every heartbeat, every nerve signal, every muscle contraction, and every thought depends on this continuous flow of energy. This biological requirement places humans within a vast ecological system of energy. Transfer that begins with the sun. Plants capture solar energy through photosynthesis, using sunlight to convert carbon dioxide and water into sugars and oxygen. These sugars store chemical energy that can be transferred through the food chain when animals eat plants or other animals. Humans are part of this chain, acting as omnivores capable of consuming both plant and animal sources of energy. The calories listed on food labels are simply measurements of the amount of chemical energy stored in those foods. One dietary calorie, technically a kilocalorie, represents the amount of energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. While the concept seems simple, this unit reflects a fundamental biological truth. Food is energy packaged in molecular form, yet food is not merely fuel. While the body requires energy to function, it also requires raw materials to build and repair tissues. Proteins supply amino acids used to construct muscles, enzymes, and hormones. Fats contribute to cell membranes and provide long-term energy storage. Carbohydrates supply readily accessible fuel for brain and muscle activity. Vitamins and minerals act as cofactors in biochemical reactions, enabling enzymes to function properly. A deficiency in any of these components can disrupt metabolism and lead to disease. The discovery of vitamins in the early 20th century revolutionized nutrition science by demonstrating that food contains micronutrients essential in small quantities for human health. Diseases such as scurvy, beriberi, and rickets were eventually traced to deficiencies in vitamin C, thiamine, and vitamin D, respectively. The human body is also finely tuned to regulate energy balance. Hormonal systems coordinate hunger, digestion, and energy storage. Insulin helps regulate blood glucose levels by allowing cells to absorb sugar from the bloodstream. Glucagon performs the opposite function when glucose levels fall. Leptin and ghrelin act as hormonal signals that influence hunger and satiety. Leptin, produced by fat cells, signals the brain that energy stores are sufficient, while ghrelin, produced in the stomach, stimulates appetite. These signals travel to the hypothalamus, a region of the brain responsible for regulating energy balance and metabolism. This system evolved over millions of years in environments where food availability was unpredictable. As a result, human physiology is adapted to store excess calories efficiently when food is abundant, an advantage for survival during periods of scarcity. This evolutionary background explains many features of modern human appetite. Humans are naturally drawn to foods rich in sugar, fat, and salt because these nutrients were historically rare, but valuable sources of energy and essential minerals. Sweetness often indicates the presence of carbohydrates, which provide quick energy. Fat contains more than twice as many calories per gram as carbohydrates or protein, making it an efficient storage form of energy. Salt helps regulate fluid balance and nerve function. In prehistoric environments, individuals who sought out these flavors were more likely to survive. Today, however, the global food environment has changed dramatically. Foods rich in sugar and fat are widely available and heavily processed, creating a mismatch between ancient biological instincts and modern abundance. Understanding food as energy also reveals why the human brain is such an energy-demanding organ. Although the brain represents only about 2% of body weight, it consumes roughly 20% of the body's resting energy supply. This extraordinary demand reflects the complexity of neural activity. Billions of neurons communicate through electrochemical signals, and maintaining these signals requires continuous ATP production. Some evolutionary scientists have suggested that dietary changes played a role in enabling the expansion of the human brain. Access to calorie-dense foods such as cooked meat and tubers may have provided the energy necessary to support larger brains during human evolution. The relationship between food and brain development leads directly to one of the most important turning points in human history: the control of fire and the invention of cooking. Cooking fundamentally changes the chemical structure of food. Heat breaks down tough plant fibers, denatures proteins, and gelatinizes starches, making nutrients easier to digest. Studies have shown that cooked food yields more usable calories than raw food because less energy is required for digestion. This insight has led some anthropologists, such as Richard Wrangham of Harvard University, to argue that cooking may have been essential for human evolution. According to this hypothesis, early humans who began cooking food gained access to more energy, which allowed their bodies to support larger brains while reducing the size of the digestive tract. Before cooking and agriculture, early humans survived as hunter-gatherers, relying on a diverse diet that included fruits, nuts, roots, insects, fish, and game animals. Archaeological evidence suggests that human diets varied widely depending on geography and climate. In tropical regions, plant foods may have been abundant year-round, while in colder regions, hunting large animals provided essential calories and fat. Stone tools discovered at sites dating back more than 2 million years show that early members of the genus Homo were capable of processing meat and plant materials efficiently. Cut marks on fossilized bones indicate that early humans used tools to butcher animals, suggesting that meat consumption became increasingly important in human diets. The variability of these early diets demonstrates a key feature of human biology: flexibility. Unlike many animals that rely on specialized feeding strategies, humans are generalists. Our teeth combine features suited for both plant and animal consumption. Our digestive system can process a wide range of foods. This adaptability allowed early humans to survive in diverse environments, from African savannas to Arctic tundra. It also laid the foundation for the extraordinary diversity of cuisines that would later develop across human cultures. Food, therefore, began as a biological necessity tied to survival, metabolism, and energy flow within ecosystems. Yet even at this earliest stage, the search for food shaped behavior, technology, and social organization. Hunting required cooperation and planning. Foraging required knowledge of seasonal plant availability. Sharing food strengthened social bonds and improved group survival. Over time, these behaviors would lead to innovations that transformed human societies. The mastery of fire, the domestication of plants and animals, and the development of agriculture would reshape not only how humans obtained food, but how civilizations emerged. To understand how this transformation unfolded, it is necessary to explore the evolutionary forces that shaped human taste itself, why certain flavors are universally appealing, why bitterness often signals danger, and how the sensory experience of food guided human survival long before the science of nutrition existed. The story of human food begins with a simple biological requirement: life requires energy. Every living organism on Earth must capture energy from its environment and convert it into forms the body can use to maintain order, grow, and reproduce. In humans, this process takes place through metabolism, a complex network of chemical reactions that transform the molecules in food into usable cellular energy. At the center of this system is a molecule called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, which acts as the universal energy currency of life. When humans eat, the carbohydrates, fats, and proteins in food are broken down during digestion into smaller molecules such as glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids. These molecules are absorbed into the bloodstream and transported to cells throughout the body. Inside each cell, mitochondria, often described as the power plants of the cell, convert these molecules into ATP through processes such as glycolysis, the citric acid cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation. Every heartbeat, every nerve signal, every muscle contraction, and every thought depends on this continuous flow of energy. This biological requirement places humans within a vast ecological system of energy transfer that begins with the sun. Plants capture solar energy through photosynthesis, using sunlight to convert carbon dioxide and water into sugars and oxygen. These sugars store chemical energy that can be transferred through the food chain when animals eat plants or other animals. Humans are part of this chain, acting as omnivores capable of consuming both plant and animal sources of energy. The calories listed on food labels are simply measurements of the amount of chemical energy stored in those foods. One dietary calorie, technically a kilocalorie, represents the amount of energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. While the concept seems simple, this unit reflects a fundamental biological truth. Food is energy packaged in molecular form. Yet food is not merely fuel. While the body requires energy to function, it also requires raw materials to build and repair tissues. Proteins supply amino acids used to construct muscles, enzymes, and hormones. Fats contribute to cell membranes and provide long-term energy storage. Carbohydrates supply readily accessible fuel for brain and muscle activity. Vitamins and minerals act as cofactors in biochemical reactions, enabling enzymes to function properly. A deficiency in any of these components can disrupt metabolism and lead to disease. The discovery of vitamins in the early 20th century revolutionized nutrition science by demonstrating that food contains micronutrients essential in small quantities for human health. Diseases such as scurvy, beriberi, and rickets were eventually traced to deficiencies in vitamin C, thiamine, and vitamin D, respectively. The human body is also finely tuned to regulate energy balance. Hormonal systems coordinate hunger, digestion, and energy storage. Insulin helps regulate blood glucose levels by allowing cells to absorb sugar from the bloodstream. Glucagon performs the opposite function when glucose levels fall. Leptin and ghrelin act as hormonal signals that influence hunger and satiety. Leptin, produced by fat cells, signals the brain that energy stores are sufficient, while ghrelin, produced in the stomach, stimulates appetite. These signals travel to the hypothalamus, a region of the brain responsible for regulating energy balance and metabolism. This system evolved over millions of years in environments where food availability was unpredictable. As a result, human physiology is adapted to store excess calories efficiently when food is abundant, an advantage for survival during periods of scarcity. This evolutionary background explains many features of modern human appetite. Humans are naturally drawn to foods rich in sugar, fat, and salt because these nutrients were historically rare but valuable sources of energy and essential minerals. Sweetness often indicates the presence of carbohydrates, which provide quick energy. Fat contains more than twice as many calories per gram as carbohydrates or protein, making it an efficient storage form of energy. Salt helps regulate fluid balance and nerve function. In prehistoric environments, individuals who sought out these flavors were more likely to survive. Today, however, the global food environment has changed dramatically. Foods rich in sugar and fat are widely available and heavily processed, creating a mismatch between ancient biological instincts and modern abundance. Understanding food as energy also reveals why the human brain is such an energy-demanding organ. Although the brain represents only about 2% of body weight, it consumes roughly 20% of the body's resting energy supply. This extraordinary demand reflects the complexity of neural activity. Billions of neurons communicate through electrochemical signals, and maintaining these signals requires continuous ATP production. Some evolutionary scientists have suggested that dietary changes played a role in enabling the expansion of the human brain. Access to calorie-dense foods such as cooked meat and tubers may have provided the energy necessary to support larger brains during human evolution. The relationship between food and brain development leads directly to one of the most important turning points in human history: the control of fire and the invention of cooking. Cooking fundamentally changes the chemical structure of food. Heat breaks down tough plant fibers, denatures proteins, and gelatinizes starches, making nutrients easier to digest. Studies have shown that cooked food yields more usable calories than raw food because less energy is required for digestion. This insight has led some anthropologists, such as Richard Wrangham of Harvard University, to argue that cooking may have been essential for human evolution. According to this hypothesis, early humans who began cooking food gained access to more energy, which allowed their bodies to support larger brains while reducing the size of the digestive tract. Before cooking and agriculture, early humans survived as hunter-gatherers, relying on a diverse diet that included fruits, nuts, roots, insects, fish, and game animals. Archaeological evidence suggests that human diets varied widely depending on geography and climate. In tropical regions, plant foods may have been abundant year-round, while in colder regions, hunting large animals provided essential calories and fat. Stone tools discovered at sites dating back more than 2 million years show that early members of the genus Homo were capable of processing meat and plant materials efficiently. Cut marks on fossilized bones indicate that early humans used tools to butcher animals, suggesting that meat consumption became increasingly important in human diets. The variability of these early diets demonstrates a key feature of human biology: flexibility. Unlike many animals that rely on specialized feeding strategies, humans are generalists. Our teeth combine features suited for both plant and animal consumption. Our digestive system can process a wide range of foods. This adaptability allowed early humans to survive in diverse environments, from African savannas to Arctic tundra. It also laid the foundation for the extraordinary diversity of cuisines that would later develop across human cultures. Food, therefore, began as a biological necessity tied to survival, metabolism, and energy flow within ecosystems. Yet even at this earliest stage, the search for food shaped behavior, technology, and social organization. Hunting required cooperation and planning. Foraging required knowledge of seasonal plant availability. Sharing food strengthened social bonds and improved group survival. Over time, these behaviors would lead to innovations that transformed human societies. The mastery of fire, the domestication of plants and animals, and the development of agriculture would reshape not only how humans obtained food, but how civilizations emerged. To understand how this transformation unfolded, it is necessary to explore the evolutionary forces that shaped human taste itself. Why certain flavors are universally appealing, why bitterness often signals danger, and how the sensory experience of food guided human survival long before the science of nutrition existed. The control of fire marked one of the most profound turning points in the relationship between humans and food. Evidence suggests that early humans began using fire at least several 100,000 years ago, though the exact timeline remains debated. Archaeological sites containing charred bones, burned plant remains, and ancient hearths indicate that by roughly 400,000 years ago, many human groups were routinely cooking their food. Fire introduced heat into the process of eating, and heat fundamentally transforms the chemistry of food in ways that raw consumption cannot. Proteins unfold and become easier for digestive enzymes to break. Apart, starches gelatinize, making carbohydrates more accessible. Tough plant fibers soften, allowing nutrients that were previously locked inside plant cell walls to become digestible. These chemical changes dramatically increase the amount of usable energy the body can extract from food. This improvement in energy availability had important evolutionary consequences. Anthropologists studying human anatomy have long noted that the human digestive tract is relatively small compared with that of other primates. Gorillas and chimpanzees possess large digestive systems capable of processing enormous quantities of fibrous plant material. Humans, by contrast, have shorter intestines and smaller stomachs. One explanation for this difference is that cooking effectively performs part of the digestive process outside the body. By breaking down food before it enters the digestive system, cooking reduces the amount of internal energy required to process it. This allowed human physiology to shift resources away from digestion and toward other metabolically expensive tissues, particularly the brain. The human brain, as mentioned earlier, consumes an unusually large share of the body's energy supply. Supporting such a demanding organ would have been difficult on a purely raw diet. Cooking may therefore have played a role in enabling the dramatic expansion of brain size that occurred during human evolution. The anthropologist Richard Wrangham has proposed what is sometimes called the cooking hypothesis, suggesting that access to cooked food increased energy efficiency enough to support larger brains, more complex social structures, and longer developmental periods in human offspring. Cooking also altered the social dynamics of food consumption. Unlike raw food, which can often be eaten immediately after gathering or hunting, cooked food typically requires preparation and shared space around a fire. Hearths became gathering points where early humans could prepare meals, share food, and interact socially. Some researchers believe that the regular presence of fire may have extended waking hours beyond daylight, allowing for storytelling, teaching, and the transmission of knowledge across generations. In this way, cooking may have indirectly contributed to the development of language and culture. The use of fire also expanded the range of foods humans could safely eat. Many plants contain toxins or defensive chemicals that discourage animals from consuming them. Heat can neutralize some of these compounds, making certain foods edible that would otherwise be dangerous or indigestible. For example, many tubers and roots contain compounds that must be broken down through cooking before they can be safely consumed. By applying heat, early humans gained access to a wider variety of food sources. Cooking also improved food safety by killing parasites and bacteria that might otherwise cause disease. Although early humans would not have understood microbiology, they likely observed that cooked meat and plants were less likely to cause illness than raw alternatives. Over time, these practical observations became embedded in cultural traditions surrounding food preparation. As cooking practices developed, early humans began experimenting with different techniques. Food could be roasted directly over flames, baked in ashes, or heated on hot stones. In some environments, people dug earth ovens in which food could be cooked slowly underground, using heated rocks. These early methods foreshadowed the enormous diversity of cooking techniques that would later emerge in human societies. The control of fire also influenced where humans could live. Fire provided warmth, enabling human populations to survive in colder climates where raw food alone might not have provided sufficient energy. As humans migrated into northern regions, the ability to cook and preserve food became increasingly important for survival during harsh winters. While cooking expanded dietary possibilities, it did not eliminate the need for hunting and gathering. For tens of thousands of years, humans remained hunter-gatherers, relying on a combination of wild plants and animals for sustenance. These societies developed sophisticated strategies for locating and obtaining food. Hunters learned to track animal movements, anticipate seasonal migrations, and cooperate in group hunts. Foragers developed detailed knowledge of local plant species, identifying edible fruits, leaves, seeds, and roots. Anthropological studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups such as the Hadza of Tanzania and the San people of southern Africa provide valuable insights into how early humans may have organized their food systems. These groups often consume highly varied diets that change with seasonal availability. In some seasons, honey or fruit may dominate the diet. In others, tubers or hunted game may become more important. This dietary flexibility helps ensure that nutritional needs are met even when specific foods become scarce. One important aspect of hunter-gatherer societies is the practice of food sharing. Large game animals hunted by one individual or small group are often shared with the entire community. This system reduces the risk of starvation because successful hunts are unpredictable. If hunters were to keep their catches only for themselves, unlucky individuals might go hungry. By sharing food widely, communities distribute risk and strengthen social cohesion. Food sharing may also have played a role in the evolution of human cooperation. Anthropologists have suggested that the expectation of shared food encourages individuals to contribute to group survival through hunting, gathering, childcare, or other activities. This form of reciprocal cooperation may have been essential for sustaining early human communities. Despite these sophisticated strategies, hunter-gatherer life was still shaped by the unpredictability of nature. Droughts, seasonal changes, and fluctuations in animal populations could dramatically affect food availability. Over time, humans began exploring ways to make food supplies more reliable. Rather than simply gathering wild plants, some groups began intentionally planting seeds or tending wild crops to encourage their growth. This gradual shift from gathering wild foods to cultivating plants marked the beginning of one of the most significant transformations in human history, the development of agriculture. Agriculture would fundamentally change how humans produced food, how they organized their societies, and how civilizations would eventually emerge. The transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture represents one of the most dramatic transformations in human history. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived as mobile foragers, moving through landscapes in search of seasonal food sources. Around 12,000 years ago, however, certain human populations began experimenting with the deliberate cultivation of plants. This change did not happen overnight, nor did it occur in a single location. Instead, agriculture emerged independently in several regions of the world, where environmental conditions and human knowledge aligned in ways that made plant domestication possible. One of the earliest and most well-documented centers of agricultural development lies in a region known as the Fertile Crescent, which stretches across parts of modern-day Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Israel. In this region, early human communities began cultivating wild varieties of wheat and barley. These plants possessed traits that made them particularly suitable for domestication. Their seeds were rich in carbohydrates, they could be stored for long periods, and they grew in relatively predictable seasonal cycles. Over time, humans began selecting plants with desirable characteristics, such as larger seeds or stalks that did not easily shatter and disperse their grains before harvest. Through generations of selection, these wild grasses gradually transformed into the domesticated cereals that would become staples of human diets. This process of domestication is essentially a form of artificial evolution. Instead of natural selection shaping species based on survival in the wild, humans selectively bred plants and animals based on traits that benefited human needs. Seeds from the most productive plants were planted the following season, while less useful varieties were gradually eliminated from cultivation. Over centuries, these repeated choices altered the genetic makeup of crops. The plants that emerged from this process often depended entirely on human care for their survival. The domestication of plants did not occur only in the Fertile Crescent. In East Asia, early farmers began cultivating rice and millet. In Mesoamerica, indigenous communities domesticated maize, beans, and squash. In the Andes region of South America, potatoes became a central food crop. In Africa, Sorghum and millet were domesticated in regions where these drought-tolerant grains could thrive. Each region developed its own agricultural system based on the plants best suited to local climates and soils. Agriculture offered a significant advantage over hunting and gathering: predictability. By planting seeds and tending crops, humans could produce large quantities of food in a single location. This stability allowed populations to grow because food supplies were less dependent on the unpredictable movements of wild animals or the seasonal availability of plants. Stored grain could support communities through periods of scarcity, and fields could be replanted year after year. However, agriculture also introduced new challenges. Farming requires sustained labor. Fields must be cleared, planted, irrigated, and protected from pests. Harvesting and processing crops require additional effort. While hunter-gatherers often consumed a wide variety of foods, early agricultural diets frequently relied heavily on a small number of staple crops. This reduction in dietary diversity sometimes led to nutritional deficiencies. Archaeological studies of ancient skeletons suggest that early farming communities occasionally experienced poorer health compared with some hunter-gatherer populations, partly because their diets became dominated by carbohydrate-rich grains. Another consequence of agriculture was the rise of permanent settlements. Farmers needed to remain close to their fields in order to plant, cultivate, and harvest crops. Over time, temporary camps gave way to permanent villages. These villages gradually expanded as agricultural productivity increased and populations grew. Permanent settlements created new social dynamics. Food surpluses could be stored, redistributed, or traded. Certain individuals began specializing in tasks other than food production, such as tool making, pottery, or construction. The ability to produce food surpluses was particularly significant. In hunter-gatherer societies, most individuals were directly involved in obtaining food. Agriculture allowed some members of society to pursue other activities because the food supply could support them even if they were not farming themselves. This specialization laid the groundwork for the emergence of complex societies. Artisans, traders, administrators, and eventually rulers appeared as agricultural communities expanded. Agriculture also required the development of new technologies. Early farmers invented tools for planting and harvesting crops, including digging sticks, hoes, and later plows. Irrigation systems were developed to transport water from rivers to fields, especially in regions where rainfall was limited. In places such as Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, large-scale irrigation projects allowed crops to grow in otherwise arid landscapes. Grain storage became another crucial innovation. Because harvests occurred at specific times of the year, communities needed ways to preserve food for months until the next harvest. Clay granaries and storage pits were constructed to protect grains from moisture, pests, and spoilage. The ability to store food not only protected communities from famine, but also enabled trade. Surplus grain could be exchanged for other goods, fostering economic networks between regions. As agriculture expanded, humans also began domesticating animals. Domesticated animals provided meat, milk, hides, and eventually labor for tasks such as plowing fields and transporting goods. The earliest domesticated animals likely included dogs, which may have been domesticated even before agriculture began. Later, animals such as goats, sheep, pigs, and cattle were incorporated into agricultural systems. These animals could convert grasses and plant materials that humans could not digest into edible forms of protein and fat. The domestication of animals further strengthened the agricultural economy. Livestock provided manure that could fertilize fields, improving soil productivity. Milk and dairy products introduced new sources of nutrition. Animal traction made it possible to cultivate larger areas of land with greater efficiency. The agricultural revolution did not occur simultaneously everywhere. Some regions adopted farming quickly, while others continued practicing hunting and gathering for thousands of years. Environmental conditions played a major role in determining whether agriculture was viable. In some landscapes, wild food sources remained abundant enough that farming offered little advantage. Nevertheless, agriculture gradually spread across much of the world. As farming populations expanded, they often displaced or absorbed hunter-gatherer groups. The new agricultural societies brought with them not only crops and livestock, but also new ways of organizing human life. The rise of agriculture ultimately set the stage for the development of cities, trade networks, and complex civilizations. With stable food supplies, populations could concentrate in large settlements. Surpluses could support political leaders, religious institutions, and armies. Food production became the foundation upon which the earliest civilizations were built. Yet even as agriculture transformed human society, food remained deeply tied to biology, ecology, and culture. The crops humans chose to cultivate shaped cuisines, economies, and identities across continents. Understanding how these crops were domesticated and how they spread across the world reveals the next chapter in the long scientific and historical story of human food. As agriculture expanded and stabilized food production, the domestication of animals became an equally transformative development in human food systems. While plants provided carbohydrates and many essential nutrients, domesticated animals offered concentrated sources of protein, fat, and other valuable materials. The domestication process, much like plant cultivation, involved generations of human-guided selection that gradually altered the behavior, physiology, and genetics of certain animal species. Animals that were less aggressive, more tolerant of human presence, and capable of reproducing under controlled conditions were favored and bred repeatedly. Over time, these traits became embedded within domesticated populations, creating animals that differed significantly from their wild ancestors. The earliest animals to be domesticated were likely dogs, which appear in archaeological evidence dating back at least 15,000 years, and possibly much earlier. Unlike later livestock species, dogs may have initially domesticated themselves through a mutualistic relationship with human communities. Wolves that were less fearful of humans may have scavenged near campsites, benefiting from food scraps. Humans, in turn, may have gained early warning systems against predators or assistance during hunts. Over generations, this relationship evolved into the domestic dog, one of humanity's earliest companions. Livestock domestication began later, during the early agricultural period. Goats and sheep were among the first animals to be domesticated in the Fertile Crescent roughly 10,000 years ago. These animals were particularly suitable because they lived in herds, reproduced relatively quickly, and could graze on vegetation that humans could not directly consume. Herd animals are especially favorable for domestication because their natural social hierarchies allow humans to replace the dominant leader within the group. Once humans controlled the movement and breeding of these animals, they effectively became mobile sources of food and materials. Cattle were domesticated slightly later, likely from wild aurochs, large and powerful bovines that once roamed across Eurasia. Domesticated cattle provided not only meat, but also milk, hides, and eventually labor for pulling plows and carts. The introduction of dairy products significantly expanded human diets. Milk contains proteins, fats, sugars, and minerals that provide valuable nutrition. However, most mammals lose the ability to digest lactose, the sugar found in milk, after infancy. In some human populations, genetic mutations allowed adults to continue producing lactase, the enzyme necessary to digest lactose. This adaptation, known as lactase persistence, became common in regions where dairy farming was practiced for generations, particularly in parts of Europe and East Africa. The evolution of lactase persistence illustrates how human biology can adapt relatively quickly to changes in diet and food production. Pigs were domesticated independently in several parts of the world, including East Asia and Europe. Unlike grazing animals such as sheep and cattle, pigs are omnivores, capable of consuming a wide variety of plant and animal foods. This flexibility made them highly adaptable to different agricultural environments. Chickens, originally descended from wild jungle fowl in Southeast Asia, became another important domesticated species. Chickens reproduce quickly and provide both meat and eggs, making them efficient sources of protein. The integration of animals into agricultural systems fundamentally reshaped human economies and landscapes. Livestock allowed humans to convert grasses and agricultural byproducts into edible food. Animals could graze on lands unsuitable for crop cultivation, effectively expanding the amount of usable food production within a given region. In addition, animals provided manure, which became one of the earliest fertilizers used to enrich soil fertility and sustain crop yields. Animal domestication also introduced new risks and biological interactions. Living in close proximity to animals increased the likelihood of diseases crossing from animals to humans, a process known as zoonotic transmission. Many infectious diseases that have affected human populations throughout history, including influenza, measles, and certain forms of tuberculosis, originated from pathogens that evolved in domesticated animals before adapting to human hosts. The dense settlements that accompanied agriculture created ideal conditions for such diseases to spread, shaping patterns of health and mortality throughout early civilizations. At the same time, domesticated animals expanded culinary possibilities. Meat could be roasted, dried, or preserved in various ways. Milk could be fermented into yogurt or cheese, extending its shelf life and altering its nutritional properties. Animal fats could be rendered and used for cooking or preservation. These innovations expanded the diversity of human diets and contributed to the development of distinct culinary traditions. Fermentation in particular became one of the most significant early food technologies. Long before humans understood microbiology, they discovered that certain foods could be transformed through the action of naturally occurring microorganisms, such as yeast and bacteria. Fermentation can convert sugars into alcohol or organic acids, producing foods and beverages with new flavors, textures, and preservation qualities. Some of the earliest fermented foods likely included beer, bread, yogurt, and various pickled vegetables. Bread and beer, in fact, may have emerged from similar fermentation processes. When grains such as wheat or barley are mixed with water and allowed to sit, wild yeast present in the environment can begin to ferment the sugars within the mixture. If the mixture is baked, the yeast produces carbon dioxide gas that causes the dough to rise, creating bread. If the mixture is left to ferment longer without baking, the sugars are converted into alcohol, producing beer. Archaeological evidence suggests that early forms of beer may have been produced as early as 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. Fermentation offered several advantages. It preserved food by creating environments inhospitable to harmful bacteria. The acids or alcohol produced during fermentation inhibited spoilage organisms. Fermented foods also often became easier to digest. Microbes break down complex molecules, releasing nutrients and sometimes producing vitamins in the process. For example, certain fermentation processes increase the availability of B vitamins in foods. Salt and drying provided additional methods of preservation. Salt draws water out of microbial cells through osmosis, preventing the growth of many bacteria that cause food spoilage. Drying removes moisture that microorganisms require to survive. These techniques allowed early societies to store meat and fish for extended periods, making it possible to transport food over long distances. The ability to preserve and store food had enormous economic consequences. Surplus food could be traded between communities, creating early trade networks. Certain preserved foods, particularly salt and spices, became valuable commodities. In fact, many ancient trade routes were built largely around the movement of food products. Salt, essential for both nutrition and food preservation, was so valuable in some regions that it functioned as a form of currency. The word salary itself derives from the Latin word salarium, referring to payments historically associated with salt. As trade expanded, foods and cooking techniques spread between cultures. Spices from South Asia traveled to the Middle East and Europe. Rice cultivation spread across Asia. Wheat became a staple across much of Europe and the Mediterranean. These exchanges gradually transformed regional cuisines and connected distant societies through shared food systems. With the growth of agricultural production and trade, food began to influence not only individual survival, but also the rise of political power. Kingdoms and empires depended on reliable food supplies to support growing populations, armies, and administrative systems. Control over fertile land, irrigation systems, and grain storage became central to the stability of early states. Food had become far more than a biological necessity. It had become the foundation of economic systems, cultural traditions, and political structures. As civilizations continued to grow, the production and distribution of food would shape the development of cities, trade networks, and entire empires. As agricultural production expanded and food surpluses became more reliable, food began to play an increasingly central role in the development of complex civilizations. The ability to produce more food than was immediately necessary for survival allowed populations to grow and societies to organize themselves in new ways. Large agricultural surpluses could support individuals who were not directly involved in farming. Artisans, merchants, soldiers, administrators, and religious leaders emerged within these expanding societies, forming the foundations of organized states and urban life. In this way, the control and management of food resources became deeply intertwined with the rise of political power. One of the clearest examples of this relationship between food and civilization can be seen in ancient Egypt. The entire Egyptian civilization was built upon the predictable flooding of the Nile River. Each year, seasonal floods deposited nutrient-rich sediments along the riverbanks, creating fertile farmland in an otherwise desert environment. Egyptian farmers planted crops such as wheat and barley in the moist soil left behind by receding floodwaters. The resulting harvests were often abundant, allowing Egyptian rulers to collect grain taxes and store surplus food in massive granaries. These stored reserves allowed the state to feed workers during periods of famine or drought and to support large construction projects such as temples and pyramids. In essence, the stability of Egyptian civilization depended on the reliable production and storage of food. Similar patterns emerged in other early civilizations. In Mesopotamia, located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, irrigation systems were constructed to channel water into agricultural fields. These irrigation networks required coordinated labor and centralized management, contributing to the development of early bureaucratic states. Grain storage and distribution became central functions of government institutions. Clay tablets discovered by archaeologists often contain records of grain inventories, food rations, and agricultural transactions, illustrating how closely food production was linked to administrative systems. In ancient China, early dynasties relied heavily on the cultivation of millet and later rice. Large-scale irrigation systems and terraced rice fields allowed farmers to produce impressive yields. The Chinese state developed extensive systems for managing grain storage and redistribution. During times of famine, government granaries could release stored grain to stabilize food supplies and prevent social unrest. This relationship between agricultural stability and political legitimacy became a recurring theme throughout Chinese history. Rulers were often judged by their ability to maintain food security for the population. Food production also played a critical role in shaping social hierarchies. Land ownership became one of the primary sources of wealth and power in many early agricultural societies. Those who controlled fertile land or irrigation systems often held significant influence within their communities. Agricultural laborers and tenant farmers, on the other hand, frequently occupied lower positions within social hierarchies. This structure would persist for thousands of years in many parts of the world. Trade networks built around food further expanded the influence of agricultural societies. Surplus grain could be exchanged for metals, textiles, pottery, and other goods. Coastal communities traded fish and salt with inland agricultural settlements, Over time, these exchanges developed into long-distance trade routes connecting distant regions. Some of the most famous trade networks in history were built around food products and culinary ingredients. Spices, in particular, became highly prized commodities. Spices such as cinnamon, pepper, cloves, and nutmeg were valued not only for their flavors, but also for their preservative properties. In an era before refrigeration, spices could help mask the taste of meat that had begun to spoil or enhance preserved foods. Many spices also possessed antimicrobial properties that slowed bacterial growth. Because these plants grew only in specific regions of the world, particularly in South and Southeast Asia, they became the focus of extensive trade networks linking Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. The demand for spices eventually drove exploration and global trade expansion. European traders and explorers sought direct access to spice-producing regions in order to bypass intermediaries who controlled existing trade routes. This quest for spices played a role in the development of maritime exploration during the 15th and 16th centuries. Voyages undertaken by explorers such as Vasco da Gama and Ferdinand Magellan were partly motivated by the desire to establish direct trade connections with spice-producing regions. Sugar became another powerful economic driver. Originally cultivated in Southeast Asia and later in India and the Middle East, sugar was initially a rare luxury in Europe. As European colonial powers expanded into the Caribbean and the Americas, sugar plantations became major economic enterprises. These plantations relied heavily on enslaved labor, linking the global sugar trade to the transatlantic slave trade. Sugar production transformed global diets and economies, making sweet foods more widely available, while also contributing to profound social and political consequences. Tea, coffee, and cocoa followed similar trajectories. Tea cultivation expanded in China and later in India, becoming one of the most widely consumed beverages in the world. Coffee, originally cultivated in Ethiopia and Yemen, spread through trade networks across the Middle East and Europe. Cocoa, domesticated by ancient Mesoamerican civilizations, eventually became a key ingredient in chocolate production after European colonization of the Americas. These beverages became central to global trade and social rituals. The expansion of global food trade also led to the exchange of crops between continents in a process known as the Columbian Exchange. Following Christopher Columbus's voyages to the Americas in the late 15th century, plants and animals were transported between the eastern and western hemispheres. Crops such as maize, potatoes, tomatoes, and cacao spread from the Americas to Europe, Africa, and Asia. In return, wheat, rice, sugarcane, and domesticated livestock were introduced to the Americas. The potato, in particular, had a dramatic impact on global food systems. Originally cultivated in the Andes Mountains of South America, potatoes proved to be highly nutritious and adaptable to different climates. When introduced to Europe, potatoes quickly became an important staple crop, especially in regions where traditional grain cultivation was difficult. Because potatoes produce large yields in relatively small areas of land, they supported rapid population growth in parts of Europe during the 18th and 19th centuries. Maize also spread widely across the world. Its adaptability to diverse climates allowed it to become a staple crop in many regions of Africa and Asia. The global exchange of crops dramatically increased agricultural diversity and reshaped diets across continents. By the early modern period, food had become deeply embedded in global economic systems. Agricultural production supported growing populations, trade networks connected distant regions, and culinary traditions reflected centuries of cultural exchange. Yet as food production expanded to feed larger populations, new challenges began to emerge. Feeding millions, and eventually billions, of people would require technological innovations that transformed agriculture and food processing on an unprecedented scale. As populations expanded and cities grew larger, the demand for food increased dramatically. Feeding dense urban populations required more than traditional farming techniques and local markets. It required new systems of production, transportation, preservation, and distribution that could move food across vast distances while preventing spoilage. This transformation began gradually, but accelerated dramatically during the 19th and 20th centuries with the industrialization of food systems. One of the most important technological breakthroughs in this transformation was the development of modern food preservation techniques. For most of human history, food preservation relied primarily on drying, salting, smoking, or fermentation. These methods could extend the life of certain foods, but they had limitations. Fresh fruits, vegetables, and meats were still highly perishable and difficult to transport long distances without spoilage. This constraint shaped local diets, which depended heavily on seasonal availability. In the early 19th century, a new method emerged that would revolutionize food storage: canning. The origins of canning can be traced to a challenge issued by the French government in the late 1700s. Napoleon Bonaparte recognized that feeding large armies during long military campaigns required reliable food preservation methods. In response, the French government offered a reward to anyone who could develop a practical way to preserve food for extended periods. A French confectioner named Nicolas Appert eventually solved this problem. Appert discovered that food sealed in glass containers and heated in boiling water could be preserved for long periods without spoiling. Although he did not understand the microbiology behind his method, the heat effectively destroyed many microorganisms responsible for food decay. Later improvements replaced glass jars with sealed metal cans, making preserved food easier to transport and store. Canning allowed vegetables, meats, and soups to be stored for months or even years, dramatically expanding the geographic reach of food distribution. Another transformative innovation was refrigeration. For centuries, people had attempted to preserve food by storing it in cool environments such as caves, ice houses, or underground cellars. But these methods relied on natural conditions and were limited in scale. The development of mechanical refrigeration in the late 19th century changed this entirely. Refrigeration systems used chemical refrigerants to absorb heat and maintain low temperatures within enclosed spaces. By slowing the growth of bacteria and other spoilage organisms, refrigeration significantly extended the shelf life of many foods. Refrigerated rail cars and ships soon allowed meat, dairy, and produce to be transported across continents and oceans. This innovation reshaped agricultural economies. Regions with favorable climates for certain crops could now export their products to distant markets. For example, refrigerated shipping enabled large-scale meat exports from Argentina and Australia to Europe, while fruits grown in warmer climates could reach colder regions where they would not normally grow. The industrialization of food processing further transformed how food was produced and consumed. Factories began producing standardized food products on a massive scale. Grain mills, meat packing plants, and dairy processing facilities introduced mechanization into food production. These industries increased efficiency, but also introduced new concerns about food safety and quality. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, public awareness of unsanitary conditions in food processing plants led to the development of food safety regulations in many countries. Scientific advances also began to reshape agriculture itself. Farmers had long relied on traditional knowledge to maintain soil fertility and crop productivity, but the emerging science of chemistry introduced new possibilities. One of the most important developments was the invention of synthetic fertilizers. Plants require essential nutrients such as nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in order to grow. In natural ecosystems, these nutrients are recycled through the decomposition of organic matter. However, intensive agriculture can deplete soil nutrients over time. In the early 20th century, the German chemist Fritz Haber developed a process for synthesizing ammonia from atmospheric nitrogen. This discovery, later industrialized by Carl Bosch, made it possible to produce nitrogen fertilizers on an enormous scale. The Haber-Bosch process dramatically increased agricultural productivity by providing farmers with a reliable source of nitrogen to enrich their soils. Many historians consider this invention one of the most important scientific breakthroughs in human history because it allowed food production to keep pace with rapidly growing global populations. Mechanization also played a major role in transforming agriculture. Tractors replaced animal-powered plows, allowing farmers to cultivate larger areas of land with fewer workers. Mechanical harvesters and irrigation systems increased efficiency and reduced labor demands. As agricultural productivity increased, fewer people were required to work on farms. In many industrialized countries, this shift allowed large portions of the population to move into urban areas and pursue non-agricultural occupations. The 20th century brought another major transformation known as the Green Revolution. Beginning in the mid-20th century, agricultural scientists developed new high-yield varieties of staple crops such as wheat and rice. These crops were bred to respond well to fertilizers and irrigation, producing much larger harvests than traditional varieties. Combined with improved farming techniques, pesticides, and irrigation systems, these innovations dramatically increased global food production. The Green Revolution had profound effects on global food security. In many parts of Asia and Latin America, crop yields increased dramatically, helping to prevent widespread famine and support rapidly growing populations. However, the Green Revolution also introduced new challenges. High-yield crops often required significant inputs of fertilizers, pesticides, and water. These inputs could have environmental consequences, including soil degradation, water pollution, and the loss of biodiversity. As industrial food systems expanded, diets began to change as well. Processed foods became increasingly common, particularly in urban environments where people relied more heavily on packaged and prepared meals. Food manufacturers developed techniques to refine grains, extract sugars, and modify fats in ways that improved shelf life and convenience. These innovations made food more accessible and affordable, but also introduced new health concerns. Modern nutrition science began to examine the relationships between diet and chronic disease. Researchers discovered links between excessive sugar consumption and metabolic disorders such as diabetes. Diets high in saturated fats were associated with cardiovascular disease. At the same time, deficiencies in essential nutrients remained a concern in many parts of the world. These developments revealed an emerging paradox in global food systems. For the first time in human history, many societies had access to abundant calories, yet this abundance created new health challenges. Understanding how human biology responds to modern diets would become one of the central questions in the science of food. As food production became more efficient and global supply chains expanded, scientists began examining not only how food could be produced in greater quantities, but also how the human body responds to different types of food. This led to the development of modern nutrition science, a field that studies how nutrients influence health, metabolism, and disease. While early civilizations had long recognized that diet influenced health, systematic scientific investigation into nutrition began primarily in the 19th and early 20th centuries. For centuries, sailors on long sea voyages were at risk of scurvy, a disease caused by deficiencies in vitamin C. For centuries, sailors on long sea voyages frequently developed scurvy, a disease characterized by fatigue, bleeding gums, and eventually death. In the 18th century, the Scottish physician James Lind conducted one of the first controlled medical experiments by providing different dietary treatments to sailors suffering from scurvy. He discovered that citrus fruits such as lemons and then oranges could cure the disease. Although the underlying reason was not yet understood, scientists would later identify vitamin C as the essential nutrient responsible for preventing scurvy. Similar discoveries followed in the early 20th century. Researchers studying populations in Southeast Asia found that a disease called beriberi, which affects the nervous system and cardiovascular function, occurred in communities that relied heavily on polished white rice. When the outer layers of the rice grain were removed during processing, important nutrients were lost. Scientists eventually identified thiamine or vitamin B1, as the nutrient missing from the diet. When thiamine was restored, the disease disappeared. These discoveries led to the identification of vitamins, micronutrients that the body requires in small quantities but cannot produce on its own. Vitamins act as cofactors in metabolic reactions, enabling enzymes to perform essential chemical transformations inside cells. Without these micronutrients, metabolic pathways cannot function properly. Over time, scientists identified a wide range of vitamins and minerals essential for human health, including vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin B12, iron, iodine, and calcium. Nutrition science also began to examine the roles of macronutrients, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins in human metabolism. Carbohydrates serve as the body's primary source of immediate energy. When carbohydrates are consumed, they are broken down into glucose, which enters the bloodstream and is transported to cells for energy production. Excess glucose can be stored in the liver and muscles as glycogen or converted into fat for long-term energy storage. Proteins provide amino acids that are necessary for building and repairing tissues. Enzymes, hormones, and many structural components of the body are composed of proteins. Although the body can synthesize some amino acids, others must be obtained from food. These are known as essential amino acids and are typically supplied by protein-rich foods such as meat, eggs, dairy products, legumes, and certain grains. Fats serve multiple functions in human physiology. They provide concentrated sources of energy, supply essential fatty acids required for cellular function, and help absorb fat-soluble vitamins such as vitamins A, D, E, and K. Fats are also important components of cell membranes and play roles in hormone production. Because fats contain more than twice as many calories per gram as carbohydrates or proteins, they represent efficient long-term energy storage. Understanding these macronutrients allowed scientists to calculate the energy content of foods and determine recommended dietary intake levels for maintaining health. Governments and health organizations began publishing dietary guidelines designed to ensure that populations received adequate nutrition. Food fortification programs were introduced in many countries to prevent nutrient deficiencies. For example, iodine was added to table salt to prevent thyroid disorders, and vitamin D was added to milk to reduce the incidence of rickets. At the same time that nutrition science was identifying the nutrients required for good health, industrial food production was rapidly transforming the composition of modern diets. Advances in food processing made it possible to refine grains, extract sugars, and modify fats in ways that extended shelf life and improved taste. White flour replaced whole grains in many processed foods because it was softer and more stable during storage. Sugar production expanded dramatically, making sweet foods inexpensive and widely available. These changes created a nutritional environment very different from the one in which human biology evolved. For most of human history, calorie-dense foods such as sugar and fat were relatively rare. The human body developed mechanisms to store excess calories as fat in order to survive periods of food scarcity. In modern societies, however, high-calorie foods are available almost continuously, and physical activity levels have declined in many populations. This mismatch between evolutionary biology and modern food environments has contributed to rising rates of obesity and metabolic disease. Scientists studying metabolism have identified several hormones and regulatory systems involved in appetite and energy balance. As mentioned earlier, hormones such as leptin and ghrelin help regulate hunger signals. Leptin is produced by fat cells and signals to the brain that energy stores are sufficient, reducing appetite. Ghrelin, produced in the stomach, stimulates hunger when energy levels fall. These signals are processed in the hypothalamus, which integrates information about energy balance and helps regulate food intake. However, modern processed foods can interfere with these natural regulatory systems. Highly refined carbohydrates and added sugars can cause rapid spikes in blood glucose levels, followed by sharp drops that stimulate hunger again shortly after eating. Foods engineered to contain combinations of sugar, fat, and salt can strongly activate reward circuits in the brain, encouraging repeated consumption even when the body's energy needs have been met. Neuroscientists studying food and the brain have found that certain foods stimulate the release of dopamine in brain regions associated with reward and motivation. This response is similar to the neural pathways activated by other pleasurable experiences. In environments where calorie-dense foods are abundant, this reward system can encourage overeating. At the same time, global food systems face the opposite challenge in many regions of the world. While some populations struggle with excessive calorie intake, others continue to face food insecurity and undernutrition. According to global health organizations, hundreds of millions of people still lack consistent access to sufficient food. In many developing regions, diets may provide enough calories but lack essential nutrients, leading to conditions known as hidden hunger. This dual burden, simultaneous overnutrition and undernutrition in different parts of the world, illustrates the complexity of modern food systems. Feeding a global population that now exceeds 8 billion people requires balancing agricultural productivity, nutritional quality, environmental sustainability, and equitable distribution. As scientists continue studying the biology of nutrition and the structure of global food systems, new technologies are emerging that may reshape how food is produced in the future. Advances in biotechnology, agriculture, and food engineering are opening possibilities that would have been unimaginable just a few generations ago. As scientific understanding of nutrition, agriculture, and food systems expanded during the 20th century, researchers and engineers began exploring new ways to increase food production while addressing the growing demands of an expanding global population. By the middle of the 20th century, concerns about widespread famine were becoming increasingly urgent. Global population growth was accelerating rapidly, particularly in parts of Asia and Latin America. Many scientists and policymakers feared that traditional agricultural methods would not be able to produce enough food to sustain billions of people. In response to these concerns, a major transformation in agricultural science began to take shape during the mid-20th century. This transformation would later be known as the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution was not a single discovery, but rather a combination of scientific innovations in plant breeding, irrigation, fertilizers, and agricultural management that dramatically increased crop yields in many parts of the world. One of the central figures in the Green Revolution was the American agronomist Norman Borlaug. Working in Mexico during the 1940s and 1950s, Borlaug developed new varieties of wheat that were both high-yielding and resistant to diseases such as rust fungus. Traditional wheat plants tended to grow tall and would often collapse under the weight of heavy grain production, a phenomenon known as lodging. Borlaug and his colleagues developed shorter, sturdier wheat varieties that could support larger grain heads without falling over. These plants could also respond more effectively to nitrogen fertilizers, allowing farmers to significantly increase production. The success of these high-yield wheat varieties in Mexico soon attracted global attention. Similar breeding programs were developed for other staple crops, including rice. In the 1960s, researchers at the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines developed a new rice variety known as IR8, sometimes referred to as miracle rice. Like Borlaug's wheat, this rice variety produced significantly higher yields when grown with modern fertilizers and irrigation systems. The introduction of these improved crop varieties dramatically increased food production in many regions. Countries such as India and Pakistan, which had previously faced the threat of severe food shortages, were able to produce much larger harvests. Grain production rose rapidly, helping to prevent large-scale famines and supporting the nutritional needs of growing populations. For his contributions to global food security, Norman Borlaug was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970. Despite its remarkable achievements, the Green Revolution also introduced new complexities and challenges. High-yield crops often required large inputs of water, fertilizers, and pesticides in order to achieve their full productivity. In regions where irrigation infrastructure was limited or expensive, farmers sometimes struggled to adopt these new technologies. Additionally, the heavy use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides raised concerns about environmental impacts, including soil degradation, water pollution, and the loss of biodiversity. Another challenge involved the genetic diversity of crops. Traditional agricultural systems often relied on many different varieties of plants adapted to local environments. High-yield crop programs sometimes replaced these diverse varieties with a smaller number of standardized strains. While these strains were highly productive under ideal conditions, reduced genetic diversity could make crops more vulnerable to pests or diseases that evolved resistance to existing protections. As global food production continued to expand, scientists also began examining the environmental consequences of large-scale agriculture. Agriculture requires significant amounts of land, water, and energy. Forests are sometimes cleared to create new farmland, contributing to deforestation and habitat loss. Irrigation systems can alter river ecosystems and deplete groundwater resources. Fertilizer runoff can enter lakes and oceans, triggering algal blooms that disrupt aquatic ecosystems. These environmental concerns led researchers to explore new agricultural approaches designed to increase efficiency while reducing ecological harm. One such approach is precision agriculture, which uses modern technologies such as satellite imaging, sensors, and data analysis to optimize farming practices. Precision agriculture allows farmers to apply water, fertilizers, and pesticides only where they are needed, reducing waste and environmental impact. Another promising development is the field of plant biotechnology. Advances in genetics have made it possible to modify crop plants in ways that improve their resilience, nutritional content, and productivity. Genetic engineering techniques allow scientists to introduce specific traits into plants, such as resistance to certain pests or tolerance to drought conditions. Crops developed using these methods are often referred to as genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. Genetically engineered crops have been adopted widely in some countries, particularly for crops such as soybeans, maize, and cotton. These crops may contain genes that produce natural insect-resistant proteins or allow the plants to tolerate certain herbicides, making weed control more efficient. Supporters of genetic engineering argue that these technologies can reduce the need for chemical pesticides and increase crop yields. Critics, however, raise concerns about ecological impacts, corporate control of seed supplies, and potential long-term health effects. Alongside advances in plant genetics, researchers have also begun exploring entirely new approaches to food production. One of the most intriguing areas of research involves the development of laboratory-grown meat, sometimes called cultured meat. Instead of raising animals for slaughter, scientists can grow animal muscle cells in controlled laboratory environments. These cells are provided with nutrients and allowed to multiply, eventually forming tissues that resemble conventional meat. Cultured meat has the potential to reduce the environmental footprint of meat production by requiring less land, water, and feed compared with traditional livestock farming. Vertical farming represents another emerging technology in food production. In vertical farms, crops are grown indoors in stacked layers using controlled lighting and hydroponic systems that supply nutrients directly through water rather than soil. Because these systems operate in controlled environments, crops can be grown year-round without dependence on weather conditions. Vertical farming can also reduce the need for pesticides and allow food to be produced closer to urban populations, reducing transportation costs. As food science continues to evolve, researchers are also investigating the chemistry of flavor and the sensory experience of eating. Understanding how taste and aroma interact at the molecular level has become an important area of study for both nutrition scientists and chefs. Flavor molecules interact with receptors in the nose and tongue, producing complex sensory experiences that influence how humans perceive food. This field, sometimes referred to as molecular gastronomy, examines how chemical processes during cooking create new textures and flavors. Food, once a simple matter of survival, has now become an intersection of biology, chemistry, agriculture, technology, and culture. From the earliest hunter-gatherers searching for edible plants to modern scientists designing new food systems, the story of human food reflects humanity's ongoing effort to understand and manage the biological and environmental forces that sustain life. As food production expanded and calories became more widely available, scientists began asking a deeper biological question. How does the human body decide when to eat and when to stop? Hunger might seem like a simple sensation, but it is actually the result of a highly complex regulatory system involving the brain, hormones, and digestive organs. This system evolved over millions of years in environments where food was unpredictable, and its primary goal was survival rather than moderation. The central control center for hunger lies in a small but critically important region of the brain known as the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus integrates signals from throughout the body to regulate energy balance. It receives information about nutrient levels in the blood, the amount of stored body fat, and the activity of hormones released by the digestive system. Based on these signals, the hypothalamus adjusts appetite, metabolism, and energy expenditure. Two hormones play particularly important roles in this regulatory network: ghrelin and leptin. Ghrelin is often called the hunger hormone. It is produced primarily in the stomach and released into the bloodstream when the stomach is empty. As ghrelin levels rise, they stimulate neurons in the hypothalamus that trigger feelings of hunger. This is why hunger sensations tend to increase before meals. When food is consumed and the stomach stretches, ghrelin levels fall, reducing the drive to eat. Leptin performs the opposite function. It is produced by fat cells and signals the brain about the body's long-term energy reserves. When fat stores increase, leptin levels rise and send signals to the hypothalamus indicating that energy stores are sufficient. In theory, this signal should suppress appetite and increase energy expenditure. However, the system is not always perfect. In many individuals with obesity, the brain becomes less responsive to leptin signals, a condition known as leptin resistance. When this happens, the brain behaves as though the body is still in a state of energy shortage, continuing to stimulate appetite even when fat stores are abundant. These hormonal signals interact with another powerful system in the brain, the reward network. While the hypothalamus regulates hunger based on energy needs, the brain's reward centers influence eating based on pleasure and motivation. These reward centers are located primarily in regions such as the nucleus accumbens and the ventral tegmental area, where dopamine plays a key role in signaling rewarding experiences. When humans eat foods rich in sugar, fat, or salt, dopamine is released in these reward pathways. This chemical signal reinforces the behavior, encouraging the individual to seek out similar foods again. From an evolutionary perspective, this system was highly adaptive. Foods that were rich in calories were rare in prehistoric environments, so individuals who found them rewarding were more likely to consume enough energy to survive periods of scarcity. However, modern food environments present a situation very different from the one in which this system evolved. Highly processed foods often combine sugar, fat, and salt in ways that strongly stimulate reward pathways. Food scientists sometimes refer to these combinations as hyperpalatable, meaning they are designed to maximize sensory pleasure and encourage repeated consumption. When these foods are consumed frequently, they can override the body's natural appetite signals. This interaction between metabolic regulation and reward systems helps explain why controlling food intake can be difficult, even when people understand the nutritional consequences of overeating. Hunger is not simply a matter of willpower. It reflects the interaction of ancient biological systems with modern food environments, such as peptide YY, cholecystokinin, and such as peptide YY, cholecystokinin, and GLP-1 are released. These hormones communicate with the brain through both the bloodstream and the vagus nerve, signaling that nutrients are being absorbed and promoting feelings of fullness. The timing and strength of these signals depend partly on the composition of the food being eaten. Protein and fiber tend to promote stronger satiety signals, while highly refined carbohydrates are digested quickly and may lead to shorter periods of fullness. Scientists studying appetite have also discovered that the gut contains an enormous population of microorganisms known as the gut microbiome. These bacteria and other microbes play important roles in digestion, immune function, and metabolism. Some microbes help break down dietary fibers that humans cannot digest on their own, producing short-chain fatty acids that influence metabolism and inflammation. Emerging research suggests that the composition of the gut microbiome may also influence appetite, body weight, and even mood. The relationship between food, metabolism, and brain function highlights how deeply intertwined human biology is with diet. What humans eat not only fuels the body, but also influences hormones, neural activity, and microbial ecosystems within the digestive tract. As scientists continue to explore these systems, a broader question emerges. How did a species that evolved to efficiently regulate hunger begin experiencing widespread metabolic disorders, such as obesity and type 2 diabetes? Understanding that shift requires examining how modern food environments have changed the composition, availability, and structure of the foods humans consume every day. And that leads into the next major development in the science of food, the rise of ultra-processed foods and the transformation of modern diets. The rise of ultra-processed foods represents one of the most significant transformations in human diets since the agricultural revolution. For most of human history, food was consumed in forms that remained relatively close to their natural state. Grains were ground into flour, meat was cooked, vegetables were harvested and prepared, and fermentation or drying might extend shelf life. Even early industrial foods, such as canned vegetables or preserved meats, still resembled the ingredients from which they were derived. In the 20th century, however, advances in food chemistry, industrial processing, and large-scale manufacturing began to produce foods that were fundamentally different from traditional foods in both structure and composition. Ultra-processed foods are typically formulated from refined ingredients rather than whole foods. These ingredients often include extracted sugars, purified starches, modified oils, protein isolates, flavor enhancers, stabilizers, emulsifiers, and artificial colorings. The goal of these formulations is not simply to preserve food, but to engineer it for specific sensory and economic properties: longer shelf life, consistent flavor, convenient preparation, and strong consumer appeal. The result is a category of foods that includes products such as packaged snacks, soft drinks, sweetened breakfast cereals, instant noodles, frozen meals, and many fast food items. One of the defining characteristics of ultra-processed foods is the removal and recombination of natural food components. For example, a whole grain of wheat contains carbohydrates, fiber, proteins, vitamins, and minerals in a balanced structure. During industrial processing, the grain may be separated into its constituent parts. The starchy endosperm becomes refined flour, while the fiber-rich bran and nutrient-dense germ may be removed to improve texture and storage stability. The resulting flour can then be combined with sugars, fats, and additives to create a wide variety of products that bear little resemblance to the original grain. These processing techniques offer important advantages for large-scale food production. Refined ingredients are easier to store, transport, and standardize. Manufacturers can precisely control flavor, texture, and appearance across millions of units of food. Shelf life can be extended for months or even years, allowing food to be distributed globally without rapid spoilage. For consumers, ultra-processed foods provide convenience. Meals can be prepared quickly with minimal cooking, and packaged foods are widely available in supermarkets and convenience stores. However, the nutritional characteristics of these foods often differ significantly from those of whole foods. Ultra-processed foods frequently contain high levels of added sugars, refined carbohydrates, sodium, and industrial fats, while providing relatively low amounts of fiber, vitamins, and minerals. Because refined carbohydrates are digested quickly, they can cause rapid increases in blood glucose levels, followed by sharp declines, which may stimulate hunger soon after eating. In contrast, whole foods rich in fiber and protein tend to produce slower digestion and longer-lasting satiety. Researchers studying modern diets have found strong associations between high consumption of ultra-processed foods and increased risk of several chronic diseases, including obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and certain cancers. While these relationships are complex and influenced by many factors, the widespread availability of calorie-dense, highly palatable foods is believed to play an important role. Food scientists sometimes describe ultra-processed foods as being engineered to achieve what is known as the bliss point, a concept developed in the food industry to describe the optimal balance of sugar, fat, and salt that maximizes sensory pleasure. The bliss point represents the level of these ingredients that produces the strongest positive response from consumers without becoming overwhelming. By carefully adjusting formulations, manufacturers can create products that strongly activate the brain's reward circuits, encouraging repeated consumption. Texture also plays an important role in the appeal of processed foods. Many snacks are designed to provide a combination of crunchiness, smoothness, and rapid flavor release that enhances enjoyment. The concept of vanishing caloric density illustrates this effect. Certain snack foods dissolve quickly in the mouth, creating the sensation that they are less substantial than they actually are. This rapid breakdown can trick the brain into underestimating the amount of calories being consumed. The widespread availability of ultra-processed foods coincided with major shifts in global lifestyles. Urbanization and industrial employment reduced the time available for cooking meals from raw ingredients. Refrigeration, supermarkets, and food marketing expanded the reach of packaged foods into everyday life. In many countries, highly processed products now make up a large portion of total calorie consumption. At the same time, these foods have contributed to a paradox in global nutrition. In some parts of the world, calorie availability has become so abundant that obesity rates have risen dramatically. Yet in other regions, undernutrition remains a serious problem. In many developing countries, both conditions now exist simultaneously within the same populations. Urban residents may consume energy-dense processed foods, while rural communities continue to struggle with food shortages. Understanding the health effects of modern diets has become a major focus of nutrition research. Scientists are investigating not only the nutrient composition of foods, but also how food structure, processing methods, and additives influence digestion and metabolism. Emerging studies suggest that factors such as food texture, energy density, and the speed of nutrient absorption may affect appetite regulation and energy balance. Another area of research examines the interaction between diet and the gut microbiome. As mentioned earlier, the human digestive tract contains trillions of microorganisms that participate in digestion and immune regulation. Diet strongly influences which microbial species thrive in the gut. Diets rich in fiber from whole plant foods tend to support diverse microbial communities, while diets dominated by refined carbohydrates and processed foods may reduce microbial diversity. Changes in the microbiome have been linked to metabolic disorders, inflammation, and other health conditions, although this field of research is still developing. Beyond health concerns, ultra-processed foods also raise broader questions about the structure of modern food systems. Many processed foods rely on ingredients produced through intensive industrial agriculture, including large monocultures of crops such as corn, soybeans, and wheat. These agricultural systems can produce enormous quantities of raw materials, but may also contribute to environmental challenges such as soil degradation, pesticide use, and habitat loss. These concerns have sparked growing interest in alternative approaches to food production and diet. Movements promoting whole foods, sustainable agriculture, and local food systems have emerged in response to concerns about health and environmental sustainability. At the same time, technological innovation continues to shape the future of food in ways that could dramatically alter how humans produce and consume nutrients. The next major frontier in the science of food may involve entirely new methods of producing proteins, crops, and ingredients through advanced biotechnology and controlled agricultural environments, developments that could reshape the global food system once again. As concerns about health, sustainability, and global food security have grown, scientists and engineers have begun exploring new approaches to food production that could reshape how humanity feeds itself in the future. Traditional agriculture has been remarkably successful at producing large quantities of food, but it also requires vast amounts of land, water, and energy. Cropland and livestock grazing occupy a large portion of Earth's habitable land surface, and agriculture accounts for a significant share of global freshwater use. As the world population continues to grow and environmental pressures intensify, researchers are investigating technologies that could produce food more efficiently while reducing environmental impact. One of the most widely discussed innovations in this area is cultured meat, sometimes called lab-grown meat or cell-based meat. Conventional meat production involves raising animals, feeding them for months or years, and then slaughtering them for consumption. This process requires large amounts of feed, water, and land, and livestock farming is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. Cultured meat seeks to bypass this process by growing animal muscle cells directly in controlled laboratory environments. The process begins with a small sample of animal cells, typically obtained through a harmless biopsy. These cells are then placed in a nutrient-rich culture medium that provides the proteins, sugars, vitamins, and growth factors necessary for the cells to multiply. Under the right conditions, the cells divide and form muscle tissue. Researchers use scaffolds or bioreactors to guide the growth of these cells into structures that resemble conventional meat. Although the technology is still developing, several companies have already produced prototype products such as cultured chicken and beef. The potential advantages of cultured meat include reduced land use, lower greenhouse gas emissions, and the elimination of animal slaughter. Because the cells are grown in controlled environments, it may also be possible to reduce contamination by pathogens such as Salmonella or E. coli. However, significant challenges remain. Producing cultured meat at large scale is technically complex and currently expensive. Scientists are working to improve the efficiency of cell growth, develop cost-effective culture media, and create textures that closely mimic conventional meat. Another emerging approach to food production is vertical farming. Traditional agriculture relies on large horizontal fields exposed to natural sunlight and weather conditions. Vertical farming instead grows crops indoors in stacked layers within controlled environments. Plants are typically grown using hydroponic systems, in which roots are suspended in nutrient-rich water rather than soil, or aeroponic systems, in which roots are misted with nutrient solutions. Vertical farms often use LED lighting systems designed to provide the wavelengths of light most useful for plant growth. By carefully controlling temperature, humidity, light, and nutrient delivery, these systems can produce crops year-round without dependence on weather or seasonal cycles. Because the crops are grown indoors, vertical farms also require little or no pesticides. Water use can be significantly reduced compared with traditional agriculture because the water in hydroponic systems can be recycled. These systems are particularly well suited for producing leafy greens, herbs, and certain fruits in urban environments. By locating food production closer to cities, vertical farming can reduce the distance food must travel from farm to consumer. However, vertical farms also require significant energy for lighting and climate control, and their economic viability depends on technological improvements and efficient energy use. In addition to new farming systems, scientists are exploring entirely new sources of food ingredients through microbial and synthetic biology. Microorganisms such as yeast, bacteria, and algae can be engineered to produce proteins, fats, and other nutrients. In some cases, microbes can be programmed to produce molecules identical to those found in animal products. For example, certain companies use genetically engineered yeast to produce milk proteins such as casein and whey without the need for dairy cows. These proteins can then be used to create dairy products such as cheese and yogurt. Algae and other microorganisms are also being investigated as potential food sources because they can grow rapidly using relatively small amounts of land and water. Some species of microalgae contain high levels of protein, essential fatty acids, and vitamins. Because these organisms can be cultivated in tanks or ponds, they may offer new ways to produce food in regions where conventional agriculture is difficult. Another promising field involves plant breeding and genetic engineering aimed at improving the nutritional content of crops. Scientists have developed crop varieties that contain higher levels of vitamins and minerals in order to address nutrient deficiencies in certain populations. One well-known example is golden rice, a genetically engineered variety of rice that produces beta-carotene, a precursor to vitamin A. Vitamin A deficiency is a major public health problem in some regions, and golden rice was designed to help provide this essential nutrient through a widely consumed staple food. Meanwhile, advances in agricultural robotics and artificial intelligence are beginning to change how food is grown and harvested. Autonomous tractors, drones, and robotic harvesters can perform tasks such as planting, monitoring crops, and picking fruits with increasing precision. Sensors embedded in fields can measure soil moisture, nutrient levels, and plant health, allowing farmers to adjust irrigation and fertilizer use in real time. These technologies may increase efficiency while reducing environmental impacts. While technological innovation offers new possibilities for food production, the global food system also faces important social and ethical questions. Feeding the world is not only a matter of producing enough calories, but also ensuring that food is distributed fairly and sustainably. Even today, hundreds of millions of people experience chronic hunger, not because the world lacks sufficient food overall, but because economic and political systems prevent equitable access. At the same time, many societies face the opposite challenge of excess consumption and diet-related disease. Balancing these contrasting problems requires addressing the complex interactions between agriculture, economics, health, and culture. Food has always been more than a biological necessity. It is tied to identity, tradition, and social relationships. The cuisines of different cultures reflect centuries of adaptation to local environments, available ingredients, and cultural values. Even as technology reshapes the future of food production, these cultural traditions continue to shape how humans choose what to eat. From the earliest foragers gathering wild plants to modern laboratories engineering new food systems, the science and history of human food reveals an ongoing story of adaptation, innovation, and survival. The foods humans eat today are the result of thousands of years of biological evolution, cultural exchange, technological development, and scientific discovery. As humanity continues to face the challenges of feeding a growing population while protecting the planet's ecosystems, the next chapters of this story are still being written. Beyond the technologies transforming how food is produced, another important dimension of the science of food involves the cultural systems that shape how food is prepared, shared, and understood. While biology determines that humans must eat to survive, culture determines what people consider food, how it is cooked, when it is eaten, and what meanings it carries. Across human societies, food has always functioned as more than nutrition. It serves as a marker of identity, a tool of social organization, and often a symbol of tradition and belonging. Anthropologists studying food cultures have long observed that cuisines develop as adaptations to local environments. The ingredients available in a region, its climate, soils, plants, animals, and waterways, shape the basic structure of local diets. In coastal regions, fish and seafood often become central components of cuisine. In grassland regions suitable for grazing, dairy products and meat from livestock may dominate. In fertile river valleys, grain-based foods such as bread, noodles, or rice become staples. Over time, communities develop cooking techniques that maximize the nutritional value and flavor of these local ingredients. For example, many traditional cuisines incorporate fermentation as a way to preserve food and enhance its digestibility. In Korea, fermented cabbage known as kimchi has been a dietary staple for centuries. In parts of Europe, fermented dairy products such as yogurt and cheese became essential components of the diet. In Southeast Asia, fermented fish sauces provide concentrated flavors that enhance otherwise simple meals. Although these foods emerge through cultural experimentation rather than scientific knowledge, modern microbiology has revealed that fermentation often increases the availability of certain nutrients and introduces beneficial bacteria that may support gut health. Cooking methods also vary widely across cultures and have important scientific implications. Boiling, roasting, steaming, frying, and grilling each produce different chemical reactions within food. One of the most significant reactions is the Maillard reaction, named after the French chemist Louis-Camille Maillard, who first described it in the early 20th century. The Maillard reaction occurs when amino acids and sugars react at high temperatures, producing complex molecules responsible for the browned surfaces and rich aromas of cooked foods such as bread crusts, roasted meats, and toasted grains. This reaction creates hundreds of flavor compounds that contribute to the sensory complexity of cooked foods. Another important set of chemical reactions occurs during caramelization, which involves the breakdown of sugars when heated. Caramelization produces sweet, nutty flavors and deep golden colors in foods such as roasted vegetables, caramelized onions, and desserts. These chemical transformations illustrate how cooking is essentially a form of applied chemistry, altering the molecular structure of ingredients in ways that enhance both flavor and digestibility. Flavor itself is a remarkably complex sensory experience that combines signals from taste receptors, smell receptors, and even tactile sensations in the mouth. Scientists studying flavor perception have identified thousands of volatile compounds that contribute to the aromas of different foods. When food is chewed, these molecules are released into the nasal cavity, where they interact with olfactory receptors. This interaction between taste and smell creates the perception of flavor. Temperature and texture also influence how foods are perceived. Crispy textures, creamy textures, and smooth textures all stimulate different sensory responses. The physical structure of food can affect how quickly flavors are released and how long they linger in the mouth. Food scientists often analyze these properties when designing processed foods, but chefs and traditional cooks have long manipulated texture and temperature intuitively to create satisfying meals. Cultural traditions also shape meal patterns and eating rituals. In some societies, large communal meals form the center of social life. In others, meals may be smaller and eaten throughout the day. The timing of meals, the order in which dishes are served, and the social roles involved in cooking and serving food vary widely across cultures. These traditions influence not only social relationships, but also patterns of nutrition and metabolism. For example, Mediterranean diets, characterized by abundant vegetables, olive oil, fish, whole grains, and moderate wine consumption, have been associated with lower rates of cardiovascular disease in many studies. Researchers studying these populations have found that the benefits of such diets may result not only from specific foods, but also from broader lifestyle patterns, including shared meals, moderate portion sizes, and regular physical activity. In contrast, the rapid globalization of food systems has introduced highly processed foods into regions where traditional diets once dominated. As multinational food companies expand into new markets, packaged snacks, Sugary beverages and fast food become more widely available. In many countries, this transition has coincided with rising rates of obesity and diet-related disease. Public health researchers often refer to this phenomenon as the nutrition transition, a shift from traditional diets toward modern industrial food patterns. Despite these changes, culinary traditions remain powerful cultural forces. Recipes and cooking methods are often passed down through generations, preserving historical connections to regional environments and agricultural practices. Foods associated with festivals, religious ceremonies, and family gatherings often carry deep symbolic meaning. Bread, rice, and other staple foods may serve as cultural anchors that connect modern populations to their historical roots. At the same time, globalization has also enriched culinary diversity by allowing ingredients and cooking techniques to spread across continents. Tomatoes, originally domesticated in the Americas, are now central to Italian cuisine. Chili peppers, native to the Americas, are essential ingredients in many Asian and African dishes. The global exchange of ingredients has produced new culinary traditions that blend influences from multiple cultures. These cultural dimensions remind us that food cannot be understood purely through biology or technology. Human diets are shaped by environmental conditions, economic systems, historical exchanges, and social meanings. What people eat reflects not only what their bodies require, but also what their cultures value and preserve. As scientists continue studying the chemistry of flavor, the biology of nutrition, and the technology of food production, they are also increasingly recognizing the importance of cultural context in shaping human diets. The future of food will likely involve not only scientific innovation, but also efforts to preserve the culinary traditions that have developed over thousands of years of human history. And as humanity looks ahead to feeding a growing population while maintaining health and environmental stability, understanding the deep connections between biology, culture, agriculture, and technology will remain central to the ongoing science and history of human food. For most of human history, food safety was poorly understood. People knew from experience that certain foods could cause illness, but the reasons behind these effects remained mysterious. Spoiled food might produce foul odors or unusual textures, yet many dangerous microbes are invisible to the naked eye and produce no obvious warning signs. It was not until the development of microbiology in the 19th century that scientists began to understand the microscopic organisms responsible for foodborne disease. The breakthrough came largely through the work of scientists such as Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch. Pasteur's experiments demonstrated that microorganisms were responsible for fermentation and spoilage. He showed that heating liquids to specific temperatures could kill harmful microbes without significantly altering the food itself. This process, now known as pasteurization, became widely used to make milk and other beverages safer for consumption. Before pasteurization was introduced, milk often carried pathogens such as tuberculosis bacteria, Brucella, and Salmonella. These infections could spread rapidly, particularly in urban environments where milk was transported over long distances without refrigeration. Pasteurization was one of the earliest examples of applying microbiological science to food safety, but it was only the beginning. As researchers studied bacteria more closely, they identified numerous pathogens capable of contaminating food. Some of the most common include Salmonella, Escherichia coli, Listeria monocytogenes, and Campylobacter. These bacteria can enter food systems through contaminated water, animal waste, improper handling, or inadequate cooking. Foodborne illness occurs when these microorganisms multiply in food and are then consumed by humans. Symptoms may include nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, fever, and in severe cases, organ failure or death. Modern food safety systems are designed to minimize the risk of such contamination through a combination of sanitation practices, temperature control, and monitoring of food production environments. Temperature plays a particularly important role in microbial growth. Most pathogenic bacteria grow rapidly in what food scientists call the danger zone, typically between about 4 degrees Celsius and 60 degrees Celsius, 40 degrees Fahrenheit to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Refrigeration slows bacterial growth dramatically, which is why perishable foods are stored at low temperatures. Cooking food to sufficiently high temperatures can kill most harmful bacteria, making proper cooking one of the most effective defenses against foodborne illness. Food safety also depends heavily on hygiene during food preparation. Cross-contamination can occur when bacteria from raw foods, especially raw meat, are transferred to other foods through surfaces, utensils, or hands. Modern food safety guidelines therefore emphasize practices such as washing hands, separating raw and cooked foods, and maintaining clean preparation surfaces. Large-scale food production has introduced additional challenges for food safety. When food is produced and distributed on an industrial scale, contamination in a single facility can affect thousands or even millions of consumers. For this reason, modern food industries rely on systematic safety protocols, such as hazard analysis and critical control points, HACCP. This system identifies potential points in food production where contamination might occur and establishes procedures to monitor and control those risks. While microbiology revealed many dangers associated with food, it also revealed beneficial microorganisms that play important roles in food production and health. Fermented foods, as discussed earlier, rely on bacteria and yeast to transform raw ingredients into new products. Yogurt contains live cultures of lactobacillus bacteria that help convert milk sugars into lactic acid, producing the tangy flavor and thick texture characteristic of the product. Similarly, sourdough bread relies on naturally occurring yeast and lactic acid bacteria that ferment dough before baking. In recent decades, scientists have begun investigating the relationship between dietary microbes and human health more deeply through the study of probiotics and the gut microbiome. Some fermented foods contain live bacteria that may help maintain healthy microbial communities within the digestive tract. Although research in this area is still evolving, it highlights the complex relationships between food, microbes, and the human body. Understanding food safety has become increasingly important in a globalized food system where ingredients may travel thousands of kilometers from farm to consumer. Modern refrigeration, packaging, and sanitation technologies have dramatically reduced many traditional risks associated with foodborne illness. However, global supply chains also require constant monitoring to ensure that food remains safe as it moves through multiple stages of production and transportation. As scientists continue studying these systems, it becomes clear that food safety is not only a matter of microbiology, but also one of infrastructure, regulation, and public health. Ensuring that billions of people can access food that is both nutritious and safe is one of the central challenges of the modern food system. But safety and nutrition are only part of the equation. The global scale of modern agriculture has also raised pressing questions about how food production affects the planet itself. The environmental impact of agriculture on land, water, climate, and biodiversity has become one of the most important scientific and political issues shaping the future of food. As scientists and policymakers began examining the scale of modern agriculture more closely, it became clear that feeding billions of people requires not only biological and technological solutions, but also careful management of environmental resources. Agriculture is one of the most significant ways humans interact with the natural world. Crops require land, water, nutrients, and energy, and livestock production requires additional feed and grazing areas. As global populations have grown and diets have changed, agriculture has expanded to occupy a large portion of Earth's habitable land surface. Today, nearly half of the world's habitable land is used for agriculture. Much of this land is devoted to crop production, while large areas are used as pasture for grazing livestock. Forests and grasslands have been cleared in many regions to create farmland, contributing to habitat loss and reductions in biodiversity. While agriculture has allowed human populations to flourish, it has also transformed ecosystems on a global scale. One of the most important environmental concerns associated with agriculture is soil health. Soil is far more than simply dirt in which plants grow. It is a complex ecosystem containing microorganisms, fungi, insects, organic matter, and minerals that interact in ways that support plant growth. Healthy soil stores nutrients, retains water, and allows plant roots to grow effectively. However, intensive farming practices can gradually degrade soil quality. Repeated planting of the same crops, heavy machinery, and excessive use of chemical inputs can reduce soil organic matter and disrupt microbial communities. Soil erosion is another major challenge. When vegetation is removed and soil is exposed to wind and rain, the topsoil, the most nutrient-rich layer, can be washed or blown away. Because topsoil forms slowly over long periods through natural processes, severe erosion can reduce the productivity of farmland for decades. Throughout history, civilizations that failed to manage soil resources carefully sometimes experienced agricultural collapse. Water use represents another critical factor in agricultural sustainability. Irrigation allows crops to grow in regions where rainfall is insufficient, but large-scale irrigation can place significant pressure on freshwater supplies. Agriculture accounts for roughly 70% of global freshwater withdrawals. In some regions, groundwater is being extracted faster than natural recharge can replenish it. This depletion can lead to falling water tables and reduced water availability for future farming. Fertilizer use also has environmental consequences. Nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers are essential for maintaining high crop yields, but when these nutrients run off farmland into rivers and lakes, they can trigger algal blooms that disrupt aquatic ecosystems. In coastal regions, excess nutrients carried by rivers can create oxygen-depleted dead zones where marine life cannot survive. One of the largest such zones occurs in the Gulf of Mexico, partly as a result of nutrient runoff from agricultural lands in the Mississippi River basin. Livestock production contributes additional environmental pressures. Raising animals for meat, milk, and eggs requires significant feed crops, water, and land. Cattle, in particular, produce methane during digestion, a greenhouse gas that contributes to climate change. The expansion of grazing lands and feed crop production has also played a role in deforestation in regions such as the Amazon rainforest. These environmental challenges have led researchers to explore more sustainable agricultural practices. One approach is known as regenerative agriculture, which focuses on improving soil health while maintaining crop productivity. Practices such as crop rotation, cover cropping, reduced tillage, and the integration of livestock into farming systems can help restore soil organic matter and improve water retention. Healthy soils not only support plant growth, but can also store significant amounts of carbon, potentially helping to mitigate climate change. Agroforestry represents another sustainable farming approach. In agroforestry systems, trees are integrated with crops or livestock on the same land. Trees can provide shade, improve soil fertility, reduce erosion, and create habitats for beneficial wildlife. These systems often mimic natural ecosystems more closely than conventional monoculture farming. Reducing food waste is also an important strategy for improving the sustainability of global food systems. A significant portion of food produced worldwide is never consumed. Some losses occur during harvesting, storage, and transportation, particularly in regions where infrastructure is limited. In wealthier countries, much food waste occurs at the retail and household level, where edible food may be discarded due to cosmetic imperfections or over-purchasing. Reducing food waste could significantly increase the effective food supply without requiring additional farmland. Another major challenge facing global food systems is inequality in food access. While modern agriculture produces enough calories to feed the world's population, hundreds of millions of people still experience chronic hunger. Food insecurity often results not from global shortages, but from economic, political, and logistical barriers that prevent food from reaching those who need it most. Conflicts, economic instability, and climate-related disasters can disrupt food production and distribution systems, leaving communities vulnerable to shortages. In some regions, droughts or floods linked to climate change are already affecting agricultural productivity. Addressing global hunger, therefore, requires not only increasing food production, but also strengthening infrastructure, improving economic access to food, and supporting resilient agricultural systems. At the same time, diets around the world are continuing to evolve. Rising incomes in many countries have increased demand for meat, dairy products, and processed foods. These dietary shifts place additional pressure on agricultural systems, particularly because producing animal-based foods often requires more resources than producing plant-based foods. Scientists and policymakers are increasingly examining how dietary patterns might evolve in ways that support both human health and environmental sustainability. Diets that include more plant-based foods and fewer resource-intensive animal products may help reduce environmental pressures while still providing adequate nutrition. However, dietary choices are deeply influenced by culture, tradition, and economic conditions, making large-scale changes complex. The future of food will likely depend on a combination of strategies: improving agricultural efficiency, developing new technologies, reducing waste, and encouraging dietary patterns that balance human needs with planetary limits. Feeding the world in the coming century will require not only scientific innovation, but also careful stewardship of the natural systems upon which food production ultimately depends. And as these global challenges continue to unfold, one final question remains central to the science and history of human food. How will human diets continue to evolve as technology, environment, and culture reshape the ways in which food is produced and consumed across the planet? As humanity looks toward the future of food, one of the most important questions is how diets themselves may evolve in response to changing environments, technologies, and cultural expectations. Throughout human history, diets have constantly adapted to new conditions. Early hunter-gatherers ate whatever plants and animals were available in their environments. Agricultural societies developed cuisines based on staple crops, such as wheat, rice, maize, and potatoes. Industrial societies introduced refrigeration, processed foods, and global supply chains that allowed ingredients from every continent to appear on a single plate. The next phase of human food may involve changes just as profound. One major factor influencing the future of diets is the growing global population. The world's population now exceeds 8 billion people and is expected to continue growing for several decades. Feeding this many people requires not only sufficient food production, but also systems capable of delivering nutritious food efficiently and sustainably. Scientists are increasingly focused on how diets can provide adequate nutrition while minimizing environmental impact. Plant-based diets are receiving renewed attention for this reason. Plants convert sunlight into energy through photosynthesis and generally require fewer resources to produce than animal products. Producing 1 kilogram of plant protein often requires significantly less land, water, and energy than producing the same amount of protein from livestock. As a result, many researchers believe that increasing the proportion of plant-based foods in human diets could reduce pressure on agricultural land and natural ecosystems. This does not necessarily mean that meat will disappear from human diets, but the types and quantities of meat consumed may change. In many parts of the world, traditional diets already include relatively small amounts of animal products combined with grains, vegetables, and legumes. Some scientists and nutritionists suggest that returning to such balanced dietary patterns could improve both human health and environmental sustainability. At the same time, food technology is expanding the range of alternatives to traditional animal products. Plant-based meat substitutes, made from proteins extracted from soy, peas, or other plants, are designed to mimic the taste and texture of meat. Advances in food engineering have made these products increasingly convincing in terms of flavor and cooking behavior, while early plant-based substitutes were often simple vegetable patties. Modern formulations use sophisticated processing techniques to replicate the fibrous structure of muscle tissue. Insects are also being explored as a potential protein source in many regions. Insects are highly efficient at converting feed into body mass and require far less land and water than conventional livestock. Many cultures around the world have long traditions of eating insects, including crickets, mealworms, and grasshoppers. Although insect consumption remains uncommon in many Western countries, researchers believe it may become more widely accepted as food systems evolve. Another area of innovation involves personalized nutrition. Advances in genetics and medical science are revealing that individuals may respond differently to certain foods based on their genetic makeup, metabolic profiles, and gut microbiomes. Researchers are beginning to explore how diets could be tailored to individual biological needs. In the future, it may become possible to design personalized dietary plans that optimize health outcomes based on detailed biological data. Artificial intelligence and data science are also beginning to influence food systems. Large data sets on agriculture, climate patterns, and consumer behavior can be analyzed to improve crop yields, reduce waste, and optimize food distribution networks. Smart agriculture systems may eventually allow farmers to respond dynamically to changing environmental conditions, adjusting irrigation, fertilizers, and planting strategies in real time. Urbanization will also shape the future of human diets. As more people live in cities, the distance between food production and consumption becomes an important factor. Urban agriculture, rooftop gardens, and vertical farming systems may become more common in densely populated areas. These systems could supply fresh produce locally while reducing the environmental costs associated with transporting food long distances. Climate change adds another layer of complexity to the future of food. Rising temperatures, changing rainfall patterns, and increased frequency of extreme weather events are already affecting agricultural productivity in some regions. Scientists are working to develop crop varieties that can tolerate drought, heat, and other environmental stresses. These climate-resilient crops may become essential for maintaining stable food supplies in the coming decades. At the same time, many traditional crops may shift geographically as climates change. Regions that once produced certain crops may become less suitable for them, while other regions may become newly viable. This could reshape global agricultural patterns and influence the cuisines associated with different regions. Despite all these technological and environmental changes, one aspect of food is likely to remain constant: its central role in human culture and social life. Food is rarely consumed purely for nutritional reasons. Meals are often shared with family and friends, celebrated in festivals and holidays, and used to express identity and tradition. Culinary traditions connect people to their histories and environments in ways that go far beyond biological survival. The science and history of human food therefore reveal a story that is both biological and cultural. From the earliest moments when humans learned to gather edible plants and cook meat over fire, to modern laboratories engineering new food technologies, the search for nourishment has shaped the development of human societies. Food has driven exploration, trade, and the rise of civilizations. It has influenced health, technology, and the structure of economies. Every meal eaten today carries traces of thousands of years of human adaptation, experimentation, and cultural exchange. In the end, the story of human food is also the story of humanity itself, a species continually learning how to harness nature, science, and culture in order to sustain life on a changing planet. One final dimension of the science and history of human food involves something so ordinary that it is often overlooked: the daily rhythms and behaviors surrounding eating itself. Humans do not simply consume nutrients continuously throughout the day. Meals occur in patterns, and those patterns influence how the body processes food. Modern research in physiology and chronobiology, the study of biological rhythms, has begun to reveal that when humans eat can be nearly as important as what they eat. The human body operates on a roughly 24-hour cycle known as the circadian rhythm. This internal clock is regulated primarily by light exposure and coordinated by a region of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Circadian rhythms influence many physiological processes, including hormone release, digestion, body temperature, and metabolism. Over millions of years of evolution, these rhythms developed in environments where activity occurred during daylight and rest occurred during darkness. Digestion and metabolism follow these rhythms closely. Hormones that regulate blood sugar, hunger, and energy storage fluctuate throughout the day. Insulin sensitivity, for example, is typically higher earlier in the day and decreases at night. This means the body may process carbohydrates more efficiently during daylight hours than late at night. Some researchers believe that frequent late-night eating may disrupt these natural metabolic cycles and contribute to metabolic disorders over time. Anthropologists studying traditional societies have observed that meal timing often aligns closely with natural activity cycles. In many agricultural communities, the largest meal of the day historically occurred after several hours of physical labor during daylight. Evening meals were often smaller and consumed before nightfall, the modern pattern of late dinners and nighttime. Snacking in some societies may represent a relatively recent shift driven by artificial lighting, urban lifestyles, and work schedules that extend far beyond daylight hours. Another important behavioral aspect of eating is the pace at which food is consumed. The human digestive system requires time to register fullness. Signals from the stomach and intestines travel through the bloodstream and nervous system to inform the brain that sufficient food has been consumed. This process can take 20 minutes or more. When food is eaten very quickly, the brain may not receive these signals until after excess calories have already been consumed. Slower eating allows satiety signals to catch up with food intake, which may help regulate appetite more effectively. Social context also influences how humans eat. Meals shared with others tend to last longer and often involve more varied foods than meals eaten alone. In many cultures, communal meals reinforce social bonds and cultural identity. Anthropologists have described food sharing as one of the most important social behaviors in human evolution. Early hunter-gatherer groups often distributed food among members of the group rather than consuming it individually. This sharing system increased survival by ensuring that individuals had access to food even if they personally failed to find it during a particular hunt or foraging trip. The psychological experience of eating also plays a role in how food affects the body. Sensory perception begins before food even enters the mouth. The sight and smell of food can trigger anticipatory physiological responses known as the cephalic phase of digestion. During this phase, the body begins preparing for digestion by releasing saliva, digestive enzymes, and hormones that regulate appetite. These anticipatory responses demonstrate how deeply integrated food perception is with the body's metabolic systems. Modern lifestyles have altered many of these traditional patterns. Fast-paced work environments, constant availability of packaged foods, and the widespread presence of digital distractions have changed how people approach meals. Many individuals now eat while working, watching screens, or commuting, rather than focusing attention on the meal itself. Researchers studying eating behavior have found that distracted eating can reduce awareness of portion sizes and delay the recognition of fullness. At the same time, interest in mindful eating has grown in response to these changes. Mindful eating encourages individuals to pay attention to the sensory experience of food, the taste, texture, aroma, and physical sensations of eating. Some studies suggest that this practice may help people better recognize hunger and satiety signals, potentially supporting healthier eating patterns. Food also plays a role in emotional regulation. Humans sometimes eat not only to satisfy physical hunger, but also to respond to emotional states such as stress, boredom, or sadness. The brain's reward system, which releases dopamine in response to pleasurable stimuli, can reinforce these behaviors. Certain foods, especially those high in sugar and fat, can temporarily elevate mood, which may encourage repeated consumption during emotional distress. Understanding this connection between emotional states and eating behavior has become an important area of research in psychology and nutrition. Across the entire arc of human history, food has remained a constant presence in daily life. From the earliest fireside meals of prehistoric communities to the global food networks of modern civilization, the act of eating has linked biology, culture, technology, and environment in ways few other human activities can match. The science of food reveals intricate metabolic systems, microscopic ecosystems within the gut, and complex agricultural technologies that sustain billions of people. The history of food reveals migrations, trade routes, culinary traditions, and the development of societies themselves. Every ingredient on a plate today carries echoes of that long history. Wheat reflects thousands of years of plant domestication. Spices recall ancient trade routes that connected continents. Fermented foods carry microbial cultures that humans have unknowingly cultivated for centuries. Even modern processed foods embody the chemistry, engineering, and industrial systems of the contemporary world. The story of human food is therefore not a single discovery or invention, but a continuous process of adaptation. Humans have repeatedly reshaped their relationship with food as environments changed, technologies evolved, and societies grew more complex. In doing so, they have transformed landscapes, ecosystems, and their own biological health. Looking forward, the same forces that shape the past will continue to shape the future. Scientific research will expand understanding of nutrition, metabolism, and agriculture. Technological innovation will create new ways of producing and distributing food. Cultural traditions will continue to guide how food is prepared, shared, and celebrated. In every era, however, the fundamental challenge remains the same as it was for the earliest humans searching for edible plants and animals: how to nourish the body while sustaining the environments that make nourishment possible. From the earliest migrations of small hunter-gatherer groups to the vast interconnected societies of the modern world, has been influenced by the search for nourishment. The ways humans find, prepare, preserve, and share food have determined where people settled, how societies organized themselves, and even how cultures defined identity and tradition. Long before written language existed, the search for food shaped human movement across continents. Early humans followed herds of animals, seasonal fruits, and migrating fish. Entire populations adapted their tools, clothing, and shelters to the foods available in their environments. These early decisions left traces that archaeologists still study today in ancient campsites, stone tools, and the chemical signatures preserved in human bones. The discovery of cooking may have been one of the most important turning points in this long relationship between humans and food. Fire allowed early humans to unlock more energy from plants and animals, making food easier to digest and safer to consume. Some anthropologists believe that cooking even influenced the evolution of the human brain by increasing the amount of usable energy available from food. A larger brain requires a great deal of metabolic fuel, and cooked food may have helped make that possible. Later, the development of agriculture transformed human societies even more dramatically. When humans learned to cultivate crops and domesticate animals, food production became more predictable. Communities no longer needed to move constantly in search of food. Villages grew into towns and towns into cities. Surplus food allowed people to specialize in occupations beyond farming, leading to the development of crafts, trade, government, and written language. In this sense, the rise of civilization itself can be traced back to the human ability to manage food supplies. Food also became a powerful driver of exploration and exchange between cultures. Spices, grains, fruits, and livestock traveled along trade routes that connected distant regions of the world. The Silk Road carried goods between Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Maritime trade routes carried crops across oceans. Many of the ingredients now considered essential to regional cuisines originally came from far away. Tomatoes and chili peppers, for example, traveled from the Americas to Europe and Asia only a few centuries ago. Yet today, they define the flavors of cuisines in Italy, India, Thailand, and countless other places. At the same time, food traditions became deeply embedded in cultural identity. Recipes were passed down through generations, shaped by local environments and shared experiences. Festivals and celebrations often centered on particular foods that carried symbolic meaning. Bread, rice, maize, and other staple foods became cultural anchors that connected people to their landscapes and histories. In the modern era, scientific discoveries have revealed that food is also an intricate biological system. Nutrients interact with metabolism, hormones regulate appetite, and trillions of microbes in the human digestive system help break down what we eat. Researchers have learned that food influences not only physical health, but also immune function, mental well-being, and long-term disease risk. The chemistry of flavor, the biology of digestion, and the ecology of agriculture have become fields of scientific study in their own right. Technology has further transformed how food is produced and distributed. Mechanized agriculture, refrigeration, transportation networks, and global trade systems now allow food to travel thousands of kilometers from farm to table. A single meal might contain ingredients grown on multiple continents. At the same time, scientists are developing entirely new methods of producing food, from vertical farms in urban environments to cultured proteins grown in laboratories. Yet despite all these technological advances, food still carries the same fundamental meaning it did thousands of years ago. Eating remains one of the most universal human experiences. Every culture gathers around meals. Families share food during celebrations and holidays. Conversations unfold at tables. Communities form through shared kitchens and marketplaces. The simple act of eating together continues to reinforce social bonds that have existed since the earliest human communities. Looking forward, the future of human food will likely involve both innovation and tradition. New technologies may help produce food more efficiently and sustainably, especially as global populations grow and environmental challenges intensify. Scientists are exploring ways to reduce waste, improve crop resilience, and develop foods that provide better nutrition with fewer ecological impacts. These efforts reflect the growing understanding that food systems must balance human needs with the health of the planet. At the same time, many culinary traditions will continue to endure. People will still cook family recipes, celebrate seasonal harvests, and take comfort in familiar flavors. Food carries memories as well as nutrients, connecting individuals to their past and to the communities around them. Even as technology changes how food is produced, the cultural meanings attached to meals will likely remain deeply rooted. In this way, the story of human food is both ancient and ongoing. It stretches back to the earliest fires lit by our ancestors and continues forward into laboratories, farms, and kitchens around the world. Each generation adds its own chapter, shaped by new discoveries, environmental challenges, and cultural creativity. And every meal eaten today quietly reflects that long history. A piece of bread contains the legacy of ancient grains and early farmers. A fermented dish carries the invisible work of microorganisms that humans have unknowingly cultivated for centuries. Fruits, vegetables, and spices bring with them stories of migration, trade, and exploration across continents. Food is therefore more than nourishment. It is a record of human ingenuity, adaptation, and cooperation. It reveals how humans learn to understand nature, reshape environments, and share knowledge across generations. In the quiet routine of daily meals, the long science and history of human food continues to unfold.